Hi, I'm Tomody, and in this tutorial I will show you how to create a drag and drop inventory system. This will be the final result. I have items that I can drag and drop. This could be your inventory or a chest that you're interacting with, and I can drag items from my inventory to the equipped items or whatever. I can drag items from my inventory to this other UI and they get transferred. In the inventory we can set the maximum item size, for example 25, and now I will only have 25 slots. And we can add more items by creating a new item resource, giving it a name and an icon. We can call this one Ghostfish, give it the Ghostfish icon, and you can see that it appears in our inventory. You can change the style of this inventory easily by just switching the item container. So whatever you set here as the item container, the items are going to be rendered within there. For example, in our test scene, I'm using a VBox container instead of a flow container as we have here, so that the items get displayed vertically. Before we begin, I will change some project settings because I'm using pixel art. I will set the window size to 480 by 270, and I will change the stretch mode to viewport and the aspect to keep. And under rendering, I will set the default texture filter to nearest so that my pixel art doesn't get blurry. For the icons, I'm using the fish icons pixel art pack that I found on itch. I will link it in the description if you want to use that for your own game. Once we're done with the project settings, let's create a new user interface node and save it as a scene. I will call it inventory, and let's rename the node as well. First, we will create an inventory layout. Mine will be a panel. It will have a scroll container so it doesn't overflow out of the screen. And within here, I will have a flow container. And within the HFlow container, I will add a margin container with a panel and a control with a sprite, 2D. It's a lot, but basically this will be our item and this is our item container. So to make this more clear, let's rename this to item container, and the margin container will be a single item. So I will call it item slot, and the item slot will hold our actual item, which in my case will be a sprite 2D. I will add a texture to it so that we have a reference that we can work with. So I'll drag this duck decoy in there. We will need to set a minimum size on the panel, and this should be equal to the size of your icons. For me, I'm using 32 by 32 pixels, so my size will be that. Set the anchor preset of your item control to full rect, so it doesn't overflow outside of the panel. Let's put the item sprite into the center of our item control so that we can see the icon. And let's save this item slot as a scene as well, because we will need more than one. And by pressing Ctrl D, we can duplicate our item. To display the items next to each other, go into the layout of your item container and set the container sizing horizontal to expand. Now, if we edit our item slot, we created it as a margin container so that we can create some space between them. So if we click on the item slot container and go to the theme overrides constants, you can set a margin from all sides. For me, I will set it to 5 pixels each. And now you can see we have more space between them. Next, we will add a script for our items. So let's create a new script that inherits resource instead of node. And I will call it item resource. Let's give it a class name, item resource. And here we will list all of the properties that we want for our items. In my case, I'm keeping it simple for this tutorial. I'll just add an item name and item texture, which will be a texture 2D. I'll create a new folder to keep everything tidy called items. And now when we create new items, we can just go create new resource, select our item resource that we just created, and let's call this one clownfish. We'll use this later for the items in our inventory. So give it a name and an icon, and that's it. We created a new item resource. Let's create one more for variety, same as before. Item resource, and I think I saw a barracuda. Save. I misspelled it, doesn't matter. So let's go back to our item slot and create a new scene from the item sprite by dragging it down to the resources. Item is fine. Open it in the editor and create a new script that will be attached to it called item. The script will have a class name item and a variable called item resource, which will be the item resource that we just created. And I will create a setter for it. The setter is called every time the value of the item changes, and when it does, we want to update the texture and also set the resource to the new value. And then come the side effects. So here you want to set everything that you need for the UI. In my case, this will just be the texture. And then if there's no value, we just set the texture to null. So now if we set the item resource in our item scene to, let's say, clownfish, we should see it change when we run the inventory scene. And as you can see, we have every item changed to clownfish. Let's reset that to empty so that that's our default, and we will then fill it later through the script. Now let's go back to our item slot and add a new script. Give it a class name item slot, and by dragging the item to the code and holding control, we create a new onReady variable. Now we will create the drag and drop logic for the items. For this, we can use the getDragData, which is available on all control nodes in Godot. Change variant to our item, because that's what we're going to be dragging. And then we check if the item has an item resource. If it doesn't, we don't proceed with this function. Otherwise, we will create a preview. This is what you will see when dragging an item. Mine will just be the icon, so I will do this through code, but you can also create a scene for this and customize it in the scene editor. So we will set the preview texture to our item texture from the item resource, and we also need to set a custom minimum size, which will be the size of the item texture. The getDragData expects a return value, and what we are returning is the item itself. Next, we want to define can_drop_data. This one checks whether the item can be dropped or not. In my case, it can be dropped if it is of type item. One more function we need is drop_data. This is called when data is dropped on this item slot. And when dropping an item, we will just simply replace the item that was already there with the item that is being dropped. So they will just switch places. Now I'm not using the add position, so I'm getting warnings in the console. To get rid of them, just add an underscore before the variable name. Now let's go back to our inventory scene and attach a new script. This script will hold all of our items, which will be an array of item resources. We will have the max inventory size. This will be used to generate all of the item slots so that we don't have to add them manually. And we will have an item container, which will be a control so that our system is flexible enough to use any type of control. We will need our item slot scene so that we know which type of scene we want to generate. We can drag this from our item slot, hold down control and drop it into our script. I like to add scene to the variable name. In the ready function, we want to create all of the slots for our inventory. First, we will remove all children from our item container so that we make sure we don't have any extra nodes other than the ones that we defined in our script. I like to do this so that I can still use placeholders over here so that I know what I'm doing. But when I start the code, I will have the amount of item slots that I define here. In the init slots, first we reset everything to 0. And then for I in range max inventory size, we'll create new item slots from our item slot scene dot instantiate item container dot add child and pass in our new item slot. We are removing the children from our item container, so pass that in. And after we load all the slots, we want to load the items. So item slots equals item container dot get children. Now we have all our item slots and we can go through each of the items and set the item slots item item resource to be equal to our item. And I will set the max inventory size to something like 25. The item container has to be dragged in here, and our items we defined earlier and can just drag them in as well. And when I run the scene, the empty slots are shown as ducks because that's what I left as the default here. So let's just remove that. And you can see that we have the two items that are in our inventory automatically set here. If I change the inventory size to, let's say 10, we get 10 item slots and two of them are filled with our items. Great. Now you may have noticed that you can't drag your items yet. This is because your controls aren't letting the clicks go through. Set the mouse filter of each of the controls except item slots to ignore. Then go to our item slot scene, and over here we also have to set the mouse filter to ignore and the panel as well. And on our control, we want to set the filter to pass. And now the clicks should be registered on them. Now this works, but we don't get any preview for some reason. So let's fix that. To set the preview, we have to call the set drag preview with our preview that we created in the item slot script. And now it should work. And there you have it. The drag and drop system. We can change places of items by dragging them on top of each other. That's basically it. The easiest way to create a drag and drop inventory system. To show you how to use it, I will create a new test scene. Just to show you how flexible it is. So the inventory that we created, I'll just drag it in and make it smaller. I will add an icon. This could be your character with equipped items, such as in games like Minecraft. Now I will add a VBox container and set it next to our player. Add our inventory script to this VBox container with a max inventory size of 3. The item container has to be dragged into our export variable, and the items, I will just leave them empty. I will duplicate this by hitting Ctrl D and drag it to the other side. And when I run this scene, you will see that we have empty slots over here, and they work the same way as our inventory without having to change the code at all. Now, if you want any other side effects when dropping your data, you can just change these values here. So for example, if you want a slot that destroys items when you drag something onto it, we can do that as well. So I'll create a new panel, call it item destroyer, create a new script attached to it. And same as before, we need the drop data and can drop data. The get drag data can be skipped in this case because the item destroyer itself can't be dragged. And the data that is being dragged over here is going to be our item, which we can then queue free. And when I drag something in here, it gets destroyed. Depending on how you handle items in your game, you might need to add more logic here. For example, I have my items stored in the inventory as an array of item resources, and calling queue_free will not destroy those. So keep that in mind. If you want to know how to create tooltips that you can just drag on top of these controls that we created, I have a video for that, which I will link in the description and or on the screen. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped you out, and if it did, consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and have a nice day. Bye.